All right, let's get started. Happy Monday, everyone. Thank you for joining us. You could be anywhere at any given time today. I'm so grateful that you're here spending it with us. Welcome to Make Shift Happen. I'm Edie Stringfellow. I'm the Director of Diversity and Inclusion at the Massachusetts Biotechnology Council. And Make Shift Happen is every other Monday from 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and where we talk about anything and everything related to diversity, inclusion, equity, and engagement. I will also like to say that our programming would not be possible without our sponsors. So for the month of June, PTC Therapeutics is powering Make Shift Happen. And I will also like to say to PTC, thank you so much, not just for sponsoring, but for everything that you do, for walking the walk. I was so excited to read about your one-year internship for graduate students during COVID-19 at any of the collegiate levels. So I just want to say thank you for everything that you do, and please continue to do so. And with that being said, I would love to welcome our guest today, Aremin from Third Rock Ventures, who is Head of Organizational Development. And I will also like for him to go over with me, because with my Midwestern drawl, I'm going to jack up your last name. So I'm going to ask you to pronounce your last name for me and tell me a little bit about your background.
Sure. Well, first, let me just say thank you, Edie, for having me here today, and thank you for everyone joining. And I will say that I will touch upon it as we go through our dialogue today. But when Edie and I first wanted to talk about Third Rock's efforts in this realm, the country was a very different place. So I think, in a lot of ways, this has become a very relevant conversation. So looking forward to the dialogue with each of you. But yeah, most people, I've grown up being pronounced Aremin Hacobian, Aremin Hammer, Aremin. So the actual pronunciation is Aremin Hacobian. I'm Armenian. A lot of my upbringing was shaped by being Armenian. And part of our history is one of oppression. We have a tragic history in terms of the Armenian genocide. So for a lot of reasons, that's why this topic resonates with me. It's just the sort of desire to make sure that people can be their full selves. Everyone's perspectives can really be included, no matter who they are, where they come from, what they look like, and so what have you. So yeah, that's a long way of saying that's my name.
Wow. Oh my gosh, that took on a very different, how does if you mind me asking a personal question, how does your Armenian background contribute to your role with diversity and inclusion?
I mean, I think it's not something that I've taken on a leadership role necessarily because of maybe my Armenian ethnicity. It's just something that I've always been passionate about. Maybe even distinct from my role, I've always been involved in project management and change management over my career. And I think a founding principle there is, you really, if you're going to have an effective, high performing team, for example, you want everyone's perspectives to be heard. You really want to be, enlisting the expertise and the backgrounds of what everyone can bring to the table. So a lot of that work really lends itself to the D&I realm. I just think it's in a lot of ways, myself and just everyone at Third Rock, we just feel that this is the right thing to do. It's the right way to approach business, life, and society.
Okay, well, that explains a lot. Can you tell me a little bit more about your role? You went into a little bit at Third Rock Ventures, so if you can tell us a little bit more about what you do.
Sure. So I'm head of organization health and development, and I like to describe my role in three ways. And it's good to see a few familiar faces. So, if I don't describe my role as you understand it, call me out on it. But, first off, Third Rock, was founded in 2007, and we're a biotech VC firm. And at this point, our portfolio ecosystem includes over 50 companies across the East and the West Coast. So a big part of my role is fostering a learning community that we call Beyond Great. And when you think of 50 plus companies and the number of senior leaders across that ecosystem, there's so much opportunity for mentorship, driving lessons learned, sharing best practices. And pre-COVID, we did a really good job and invested a lot of time and energy in terms of connecting people, senior leaders across the portfolio. And in a lot of ways in this virtual world, there's been even greater interest in being connected with one another, learning from one another, and what have you. So so beyond great, learning community is one key aspect of my role. Another element is just as we're launching companies, thinking about the company culture with intentionality, helping to support the development of high-performing leadership teams, engaging in conversations around core values and what that means. That's sort of the second aspect of my role. And then the third is the evolution of Third Rock itself. It's a firm that has had a track record of great success, but also we've had a lot of transition. So understanding what those changes mean for Third Rock's culture going forward, helping to sort of ensure that we're being mindful of not only changes within Third Rock but across the industry and society. So those are the three main areas of how I chunked out my time.
Well, thank you. Well, I just want to interrupt just for a second and to welcome those who just joined us and just to give them a little bit of the ground rules. For the first 20 minutes, Aremin and I are going to go back and forth with the Q&A, and the last 20 minutes, we're going to open it up to the audience, but feel free to chime in, raise your hand, have a question, chat with us at any given time. But just want to let those who just joined us know the ground rules and how we're going to proceed with the program. All right. Well, I'm glad that you went over that with us. I just have a question for you because you normally don't hear the term evolution and D&I with a venture capital firm. So you have to tell us a little bit about that. How did it come to that? I mean, please elaborate a little bit.
Sure. I mean, I guess I'll start by saying that the elephant in the room is, from a VC industry perspective, I think no one would dispute that we could be more diverse. And that's a conversation that, Third Rock has been having internally for at least a couple of years now. And that's sort of an important point that I want to emphasize is, especially in light of everything that's been going on across our country, I don't want anything today to seem as if, from a Third Rock perspective, we're being reactive. This is actually a conversation we've been having for, at this point, 2 years at least in terms of my direct involvement. So I guess I'll start by the journey really started, if you go back to the Beyond Great Learning community, we have this concept called spontaneous learning communities, where we're always kind of listening to where is their interest in getting communities together, getting people to learn from one another. And it was about 2 years ago exactly that, a couple of people were like, well, why don't we get a spontaneous learning community around diversity and understand what some of the Third Rock portfolio companies are doing in terms of D&I, maybe share lessons learned, best practices, and just drive that dialogue. And, that sounded like a really good concept. And I started to, think about how we might go about that. And then you sort of remember that we're working with, oftentimes very analytical people, very scientific, thinking and analysis. And it was a question of what are we going to talk about or set forward in terms of our objectives if we don't understand where we are today? What is our baseline? What is the problem we're trying to solve? So we went back and forth, and at first was like, do we try to benchmark our portfolio companies in terms of diversity metrics? Do we talk about Third Rock itself? What is it that we're actually trying to accomplish from a D&I perspective? So it was about a year ago that we created an internal team at Third Rock with an emphasis on diversity and inclusion, and we spent a good 6 to 8 months actually just in honest dialogue. And really, it's one thing to say you're committed to diversity and inclusion. It's another to try to figure out how do you actually achieve tangible action. So I guess I'll say that's where we sort of we're at, and I'm very pleased to say that as a team we were able to enter 2020 with some really tangible objectives that I can share in some detail. As well as received some funding from our partnership to actually achieve those objectives. So but yeah, basically it's been a 2-year conversation and journey to lead us to today.
Wow, that is so exciting because for you, it's different for other companies with VC firms. Talk about how you're going to apply diversity and inclusion at the founders level, the partners level, and then also with the board level.
Yeah, so I'll probably end, let me start a little bit from the other perspective of where we're focusing and end with that. So as a team, we identified three sort of areas that we might be able to focus on. One is just raising awareness and educating across our portfolio ecosystem. So a lot of our efforts, and I'll temper this by saying, a lot of it was pre-COVID. So we sort of had a little bit of a hiccup in terms of fully being able to activate our portfolio companies because of the COVID pandemic. Obviously, so there's focus elsewhere to some extent. But one key objective is let's raise awareness about, hopefully we don't have to make the case for why D&I is important, but what are the things that companies can and should be doing? We've also learned that there are often processes and procedures that companies do that feel that they are in support of D&I objectives, but sometimes can be counterproductive. So how can we share that information and education with our companies? Second is internal to Third Rock itself. Are there processes like the recruiting perspective, HR and benefits? You want to make sure that internally we're doing everything we can to foster an environment of inclusion, and so that's something that's happening. Third is increasing our outreach with external networks, particularly networks that might not be traditionally within Third Rock's known network of people that we've sort of traditionally worked with. And the reason that's important, I don't know that I need to explain it, but in terms of being able to tap into a collective expertise outside of your network and bring other perspectives in, you often reach the limits of your own network very quickly. And so we've been making an active effort as we hone our recruiting process. What are some of these, how do you increase the candidate pool? How do you sort of tap into candidates who maybe traditionally have had difficulty, getting into the life sciences industry or into our portfolio companies? So that's sort of the second. And then as a team, we thought, how do you make long-term impact? And where also do we have the potential to make the greatest impact? And that's really at the inception of our portfolio companies. And for those who aren't too familiar with Third Rock's model, by the time you hear of a company launching, that has been the result of an internal discovery process that represents, I think, 10,000 person hours fully within Third Rock's sort of influence and control. So we have a huge influence in terms of who are the founders, who are the board members, who are the senior leaders, and obviously continue to have great influence through Series A, Series B, and so on. So as a team, we've just a year ago raised Fund 5, and generally our funds might correspond to 8 or 10 companies during the life of that fund. We are about to launch into a conversation with our partners of what are some behavioral shifts that could improve and elevate diversity as a factor in early company formation. So one aspect is the behavioral and mindset shift that we feel is important. And then the second aspect is what are some metrics or objectives we can put in place at the founder level, at the board level, and at the senior leader level for our Fund 5 portfolio companies. And then the intention there is once we go through Fund 5, it's an ongoing process. How has this worked? How can we sort of improve our efforts around diversity and inclusion as we think about future funds?
Well, if you don't mind, I would like to ask you 2 questions, because how does Third Rock Ventures go about finding people from diverse backgrounds to mentor? And then second, you're so passionate about what you do. How is Third Rock leveraging your influence to work with your brethren at other VC firms to do the same?
So, I'll speak to the first one first. I think we're very intentionally forming relationships with organizations such as MassBio, Hack Diversity, Project On-Ramp, just a number of opportunities where I think part of the ability to make long-term impact is how do you drive mentorship and influence people to enter life sciences who traditionally might not, find that as a career path that they would pursue. So there's a number of our, leaders and scientists at Third Rock who are just seeking those opportunities, and we have relationships with those organizations and are always looking for additional opportunities. That also includes placement of interns at many of Third Rock's companies. We have a really strong relationship with Project On-Ramp, where we've been trying to, over time, increase the number of people who are interning with our firms. The second question, I got to say, admittedly, my personal focus has been more internal. I just wanted to sort of begin to shift the dial at Third Rock first. I will say, though, that Third Rock is a member of an effort. I'm trying to describe it. It's not an entity per se, but there was a diversity and inclusion event that was hosted at Biogen last fall, and members of that steering committee included Biogen, Lipstream, the New England Venture Capital Association. Third Rock is a member of it, and the outcome from that conference in the fall was the creation of a D&I VC council. We got to work on the name, but we emerged with about 50 or 60 volunteers that represent not only senior leaders from VC, but also from many of the local Massachusetts-based biotech companies. And the commitment really there is similar to what we're having a conversation around now, is what can we do from an education perspective, an action perspective, and just a long-term mindset shift in this realm. And that's a council that's about to be activated. You hopefully everyone on this call will hear something in the coming days. I think NVCA might be announcing that in the coming weeks. But that should impact in terms of how other VCs also are approaching the space, would be my hope.
How were you able to pivot during all of this when we had to go to a virtual world? It seems like it's a lot of interaction, one-on-one meetings, talking to folks. How was it that you were able to pivot virtually?
Yeah, I mean, I guess our D&I team, Third Rock shut down. I'm sure, like many of you, went virtual in early to mid-March. I think there was a tendency, I guess I'll just say, take the easy way out and just say the world's being taken over by COVID, or let's throw our 2020 goals out the window, or at least delay them. Right now, there's other things going on, and that just, I think, to every member on the team, that was not the right approach and not the right path. And if anything, I think we're all finding how effective we can operate virtually. And in a lot of ways, we're now able to bridge geography, for example, in ways that maybe we didn't pre-COVID. You're talking to someone who used to work with teams based in Japan and the EU, and time zones never were really an issue in terms of collaborating and getting together. And I can only speak for Third Rock's ecosystem. I'm feeling a connection across San Francisco and Boston in a way we never have before, because pre-COVID there was a lot of emphasis on face-to-face. And I don't know, not that there isn't value to that, of course, but I think we've been able to use the virtual setting to actually create more connections than otherwise we would have. So yeah, I mean, in light of all of that, and particularly when you think of things like recruiting, the first week or two of COVID, people were like, how do you recruit? How do you hire, when you can't actually interview someone in person? And, I think once you got over that barrier, people were basically willing to continue our dialogue from a D&I perspective. And, I'm really pleased to report our recruiting team is hugely passionate about this topic, and they just delivered sort of the implementation plan for basically, revising, updating our recruiting process to both expand our candidate pool, but also de-bias the interview process, and just raise awareness of the importance of D&I from a recruiting perspective.
Well, thank you. I also want to take a brief moment to let everyone know that we're about to open up video and audio. So please let us know if you have any questions for either me or for Aremin. We really appreciate that. And until we start getting some questions in, Aremin, I just have a question, and it's probably, I'm not sure how you can answer this, but the industry is not known for actually doing what they say in regards to diversity and inclusion. And you see a lot of VC firms now coming out with press releases. They're against racism. We are just and fair organization. But sometimes I feel as if they're hopping into the inclusion Uber and hopping out at the end of the marathon and act as if they were running the race the whole time. So a lot of Black founders and a lot of Black investors are skeptical about the seriousness to how things are really going to change. Is this really going to be that momentum, that catalyst to move the industry forward?
And I mean, I'll just start by saying the skepticism is justified. And again, I can only speak from you know, my involvement and my perspective from Third Rock. And this isn't something that we've just, you know, within the past couple of weeks, you know, put a D&I sort of, you know, approach out there to just try to make sure that we're addressing D&I. This is a commitment that, you know, going even to the inception of Third Rock, one of our core values or the foundational concepts is this concept of group genius. And it really is about how do you ensure and create an environment where everyone in the room feels that they're able to contribute, feels that they're able to be their authentic selves and lend their voice or their opinion to whatever, you know, whatever challenge that we're facing or, you know, issue that we're trying to solve. So, I mean, it's in Third Rock's DNA. But I will say that that's, you know, conceptual, and there's so much more that we can and should be doing. So, you know, to the skeptics, I say, keep the light on, you know, keep shining the mirror. And, you know, I'm sort of more than welcome. And I know that many of my colleagues at Third Rock are committed to we invite the questions and want to make sure that we also are making progress every step of the way.
Okay, great. It looks like Rachel Myers has a question. Rachel, do you want to go ahead?
Sure. So my question, hey, I just listening to what you said and having sort of, you know, seen some of it evolve. I'm just wondering, you articulated sort of a 2-year process from starting to talk about this to getting to the place you are now, which you feel like is an advance. And my question is there some 1 or 2 key learnings about that process that would enable you to help the next VC firm or other institution that wants to jumpstart those activities to sort of maybe not having a 2-year lag before they get to this place?
So first, shout out to Rachel, because she's a member of the D&I team at Third Rock and has been an amazing thought partner. So hey, thanks for the moral support being here. But yeah, I mean, especially, just honest. My honest answer is sometimes I'm coming from, you know, before Third Rock, I was at a very large, you know, global pharmaceutical company, and, you know, where the pace of decision making often was slow. And I do find sometimes that, you know, I think with any organization and any organization that has a successful track record, forcing or influencing change is difficult. You know, particularly if things are working fairly well, you know, based on whatever success measurement you have. So, you know, Rachel and I and the team, we've talked about, if you go back 2 years ago, this wasn't necessarily an active topic of conversation at Third Rock. Again, this is me talking, you know, as Aremin. A year ago, it was a topic of conversation, and it was on people's minds, and we knew that we were internally doing something about it. And you fast forward to today, there's not even a question in terms of the commitment to D&I, but more specifically, I will say, for those at Third Rock who have been involved in the process and who are, you know, committed to change, we're taking a 5 to 10 year horizon in terms of how do you influence change in a way that's sustainable. So that's how I'd answer the question. Is I mean, one lesson learned is don't give up. You know, I mean, it's hard sometimes to get, you know, the bandwidth of some of the senior leaders who often are in the greatest position to influence change. if this is an area that you are passionate about and believe in, don't give up. It's the right thing to do. Secondly, is enlist that that participation of people who want to be your fellow champions, and take some time. You know, I think it was really healthy to. It's sometimes easy to sort of say we're committed to something, but I think we took the time to really talk about what is the problem we're trying to solve, and what is the most impactful way to do that.
Well, with speaking of problems to solve, what is the next big area that founders and startups and entrepreneurs should be looking to go into, or will their research dictate the next big thing?
And I may not be the best person to answer that question. I will say that there's the longest, I guess again, it's this sort of other sort of topic that we have to, I think, openly talk about and just discuss what's the right way to proceed. Is traditionally there's maybe a certain set of institutions or you know, organizations that tend to, you know, be where founders are pulled from. So in the same way that you want to increase the constellation that you draw your candidates from a hiring perspective, how can VCs actively expand the potential pool of founders? So I mean, I think that's an area that is always actively under discussion. And you know, that's, you know, when we talk about what our sort of plan is at Third Rock, we're conducting an analysis of just who are typically those institutions where founders are drawn from. What is the degree of diversity that exists at them today? That's important to understand, because you can't set, if you were to set a target around founder diversity, you have to at least know what's feasible in terms of, you know, the actual founder pool today. So yeah, I think that's, and then in addition to that, how do you expand that pool from beyond who you may traditionally pull from?
Are you looking at different funnels, access points, different pipelines, like historically Black colleges and universities, Hispanic serving institutions? Where are you looking at differently to find the new talent and the next big thing, the next area, therapeutic area?
Yeah, no, that now you're sort of going into realms where I can't even necessarily directly speak to where those other founders might come from. I think we're trying to understand, number one, as we're thinking about our founders, are we even making diversity something that's a conversation from the very beginning of company inception? Number two, are we then having, you know, the early senior leaders of new companies as they're being formed, are they actively understanding what founders are out there who may sort of just the founders who exist, period, and then from a diversity perspective, where those founders may be. But I think this is where the conversation this is where I think the truest potential for change lies, is how do you expand that founder pool from who we've traditionally been working with?
Well, as a partner to you and to venture capital industry, is there anything that you can see us doing on our side, either MassBio or member organizations, to assist with the diversity efforts for the VC firms?
I mean, I think continuing to bring us together as an ecosystem is number one. I think being able to sort of have dialogue that gets each of us out of our sort of respective you know, organizations, and just sharing what each of us doing is helpful. But beyond that, I mean, I know you've been a huge partner, Edie, in terms of, you know, understanding what are some of those organizations that exist outside of our traditional networks, from, you know, both a recruiting and candidate perspective, but also mentorship. And the more you can provide, you know, not only provide that sort of information and resources, but also continue to check in on how are we doing and how can you support our efforts. That, I know that's for us been very helpful.
Okay. Well, we're going to wrap things up now, but before we do, I just want to ask you, are there any websites or any URLs that you can recommend that's on your website for people to go and look up some of the information that you talked about?
So far, we haven't, this is sort of not something that we put on our website. I mean, I think we have the core values that, you know, basically are foundational to Third Rock, and there's definitely elements to our commitment to D&I within those. If anything, I'd encourage people to check out our LinkedIn and Twitter, you know, just from a news and information perspective, and some of our statements on just recent events that have been happening across our society. But if anything, today, I hope what I've shared is a little bit of a glimpse into what up until now has been a very internal process. And, you know, it's a process, as we talked about, it's taken a little bit of time, but it was time that needed to be spent in order for us to, I think, really begin to move the bar within Third Rock and our portfolio ecosystem. So you know, full recognition that there's still a long way to go.
Well, we're going to be partners with you on that journey. And I just want to thank everyone for joining us today. Thank Aremin, you taking time out of your day, teaching us about the ins and outs of some of the peeking behind the curtain of the VC world sometimes. And I was checking to see, oh, does someone else have a question before we wrap up? Okay, well, I would like to thank everyone for joining us. And I also would like to invite you to our next Make Shift Happen, which is June 29th, and that's going to be with Dr. Jennifer Petters. She's the Chief Scientific Officer with Arrakis Therapeutics, and she's going to take us through her journey of being a member of the LGBTQ community and how more inclusive leadership will help people with LGBT backgrounds to become more involved in biotech, and then also serve as role models as they become more leaders themselves. So please join us June 29th. And then also we have our, everyone is waiting for, the State of Possible Conference is coming up August 26th and August 27th. And last but not least, we have our 3rd annual MassBio Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Conference. And that is going to be very exciting. It's going to be kind of intense because we're going to cover a lot of things that has taken place since our last conference. So I do hope that you're able to join us. That is August 28th from 10 a.m. to 12:15 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I would like to thank you for joining us. I will also like to say thank you to PTC Therapeutics for powering this month's Make Shift Happen. And I'll see you. And if you have any questions for me or Aremin, please do not hesitate to reach out. Thank you for joining us again.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks,
Bye.
Edie. Bye-bye.